This video outlines a behavioral economics way of thinking about trust as a mental heuristic, and in doing this we're going to cover a number of behavioral economics concepts, including effort aversion, loss aversion, arationality, bounded rationality, and heuristics. Now there's a difference between what people do trust and what they should trust, and this video is about the former. It's about what people actually do trust. And I'm going to claim that trust is a mental heuristic, or a rule of thumb designed to help us make decisions more quickly. We used to have this coffee table book on rules of thumb, and they were great. You can determine whether a ghost is real by crossing your eyes. If the image doubles, the ghost is there. If not, it's all in your mind. To avoid lunatics on a city bus, sit in the middle. Friendly lunatics sit as close to the driver as they can, and unfriendly ones sit as far away as they can. These rules of thumb make for quick decision making, and they can displace a more arduous process of deciding where to sit on a bus or whether or not to call the Ghostbusters. To think about this, we need to acknowledge that people have effort aversion. Something in our brains makes us crave shortcuts to eliminate as much effort as possible. So we constantly look for rules of thumb that'll help us make decisions more quickly. And this happens on both a conscious level and a subconscious level. And while we might be tempted to call our effort aversion a bias, it's also kind of brilliant. It's not just a bug in our brains, it's also a feature. Because effort is a scarce resource just like money and time are. So we want to spend it wisely. And that means reducing the amount of effort required for any given decision, just like we look for the lowest price when we buy stuff. And our brains have evolved shortcuts to help us make decisions more quickly, so it frees up mental effort that we can put towards other, more important things. Now, economists are in the business of allocating scarce resources. So we know we're in economics territory if we're talking about trust as a tool for more wisely allocating effort as a scarce resource. Some textbooks even define the whole field of economics as the study of the allocation of scarce resources. If emotional energy and mental energy are scarce resources, which they are, then it fits to bring economists like me to the table to think about this. So what is decision making according to an economist? Decision making is when you weigh the potential costs and benefits of different options, and then when you intentionally move forward on one particular pathway. I should say as an aside that the cost-benefit framework for thinking about decision making, that doesn't necessarily have to be deliberative. Our instincts have evolved to react to situations in a way that instinctively weighs good and bad past experiences into those reactions. And sure, sometimes those mental heuristics can be biased, but they can also be helpful. But that's a story for another day when I do a video on arationality. And just to be clear, arationality is not the same as irrationality. Arationality is a non-deliberative thing like an instinct. Irrationality is something that goes against rationality. But defining rationality is also for another video. Also, economists use these more mathematical equations like this one to model these cost-benefit decisions. And I know that more normal people use pro-con lists for this, but it's not because economists think people actually do the calculus when they're decision making. It's because the math can add these nuances like diminishing marginal benefits and increasing marginal costs. And we believe that those things get embedded into the human heart and the human experience in a way that people don't realize is really well modeled by math. Let's get back to our main point here, which is a behavioral economics way of thinking about trust as a tool for helping us in decision making. Let's use a deliberative example for thinking about the weighing of costs and benefits. So let's say Ron Weasley is trying to decide whether or not to try out for the school Quidditch team. And in reality, there are a ton of costs and benefits of all sorts that could sway him one way or another. There's a risk he could injure himself playing. There's a risk he could feel embarrassed if he's not chosen. If he's practicing sports every day, he'll get in better shape and his health will improve. There's a probability he could become a sports legend and go on to have a career in Quidditch. There's a risk that the captain could reject him and that could hurt their friendship. There's a risk he could be shamed if he's chosen and he performs poorly. He could form new friendships on the team. Practices could overwhelm his time and he could regret trying out. or the intense practice schedule could force him to learn time management. The list of possibilities is close to endless, but if he were to really think deeply about the probabilities of each of these scenarios, and if he were to try to imagine himself inside each one to try on its emotional significance, that would take him forever. Humans care about their emotional, social, embodied experience. They care about that more than anything else. Even our value for money kind of boils down to how it affects our emotions, status, and things like that. So to properly weigh costs and benefits, you really do need to imagine yourself emotionally into these experiences. And then you'd need to weigh each imagined outcome by the probability that it actually occur. And the human brain actually does have pretty good software for trying on experiences hypothetically to see what it might feel like. In fact, it's even possible that that particular talent in our brains sets us apart from animals. And the emotions we experience in our hypothetical scenarios inside our heads are pretty similar to the real experiences we would feel if we were in that situation. This may be one reason we have more anxiety than animals do. But it also takes time and emotional energy to imagine each of those possible outcomes. And we've already established that those are scarce resources. So we don't want to squander 3 weeks of time and emotional energy trying to imagine every possible outcome if we tried out for the Quidditch team. Could you even finish imagining all of that in 3 weeks? Not really. What if you break your leg during tryouts? What if you're too busy with practice to meet the girl you're supposed to marry? You could do this all day and drive yourself crazy. And this gets at the behavioral economics concept of bounded rationality. There are limits to our rationality because we just don't have the time or cognitive capacity to fully weigh all of the costs and benefits in the way I just described. So we need shortcuts, and our brains have evolved all kinds of heuristics to help us respond in an agile way to all the decisions we have to make on a regular basis. Bounded rationality just says we don't have the cognitive capacity to act fully rational, so we use good, imperfect rules of thumb. So how does this relate to trust? Well, trust is a mental heuristic that we can use instead of weighing all of the costs and benefits. Let's look at this Ron Weasley example. This list is huge and it goes on forever, but it just so happens that Ron has this older brother, Bill, who has a lot of world experience, and he also has similar values and preferences to Ron himself. Also, Bill is just really cool and he wears an earring, so clearly he's trustworthy. And so Ron can ask his opinion. And Bill's opinion can serve to silence some of these downsides, these costs that Ron's weighing when he's trying to make this decision. Now, trust doesn't necessarily mean that you hand over the entire decision to the person or the group that you trust. More often, it just means that it simplifies the decision by relying on their opinion. Take the kind of trust that you have with companies, for example. Companies have generous return policies and generous customer service desks. And one reason that companies do that is that the customer service promises take most of the costs off the table when you're making that decision, so you're just weighing the value of the product versus the price, not the value of the product versus the price and the probability that it'll malfunction, and the probability you'll change your mind once you get back from the store, and on. Because you believe that most of those bad experiences will be handled well by the customer service desk, that takes the stress out of the decision-making process. This helps a lot since human beings are loss averse, meaning we weigh the costs way more heavily than we weigh the benefits. And this makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. We're just terrified of regret. You definitely don't trust companies to make purchasing decisions for you. Obviously, you don't want to buy everything in the store, and they don't expect that. But your trust in the brand does become a heuristic that makes decision-making easier by taking some of the costs off the table when you're trying to make a decision about what to buy. And since people are effort averse, we love that. To summarize, one way of thinking about trust in something is that trust displaces this long emotional process of envisioning yourself in every possible outcome to properly weigh the costs and benefits of a decision. By trusting something, we avoid going through all these worst-case scenarios, and that probably has a good effect on our mental health. And it certainly buys a lot of emotional energy back into our lives that we can then spend on more important things. Of course, all of this begs some questions. How do we arrive at a place where we trust something to begin with? How do we earn trust? What makes something worthy of trust? So I hope this gives you some food to ponder as you go throughout your day making your decisions. And I'll continue to explore the idea of trust as well in other videos.